Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for that response. My name is Thandi, Dr. Thandi Ndlovu. I thought because I'm in an academic institution, I must add the doctor part. I'm Dr. Thandi Ndlovu, MB, BSc, MB, CHP. Thank you very much for that. And I particularly want to introduce myself as such when there are young people and students in our midst, because I believe some of us have to portray the role modeling and to show them that being a medical doctor and a businesswoman, you can still look like I do. I'm here to just briefly introduce Professor Sibusiso Vilenkomo, because he's the one who's going to welcome all of us. I don't want to take his glory. Sibusiso Nkomo was born in Johannesburg. He obtained his primary, secondary, high school education in South Africa, his bachelor's degree at Lincoln University in the USA, magna cum laude, and his master's and PhD degrees at the University of Delaware in the USA. Currently, he serves as research professor in the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship at the University of Pretoria. He is a former executive director and a member of the executive of the University of Pretoria. Professor Nkomo is a member of the Board of Advisors for the School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware, is a distinguished visiting professor at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State University, and serves on the editorial board of the 7th Leadership Journal published at Gonzaga University. In the last 2 years, he has been invited to the Fordham University Business School Consortium think tank as a fellow in Istanbul, Turkey, and New York City, where the future of business and governance, health as a business, and the arts as a business have been discussed and analyzed. In his previous position as Dean of the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, he made recognizable contributions to the faculty and the university. He was the founder of the first PhD in public affairs in the African continent in the School of Public Management and Administration. He has a long-standing and tested career as a leader and manager in institutions of higher learning, and this was demonstrated at the universities in the USA and in South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Nkomo is currently the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Institute, Mapungube Institute for Strategic Reflection, and it is my singular pleasure to invite him to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Thandi. Thandi and I grew up together, but I won't get into those details. Let me take the opportunity to welcome everybody who's here today. I think we're going to have a wonderful evening. I'd like to recognize Mrs. Machel and thank her for giving us this opportunity to hear her address us on a very important topic, which will be introduced later on. I'd like to also welcome members of the Diplomatic Corps, Judge Dikgang Moseneke, and also Chancellor of the University of the Witwatersrand. I'd like to also welcome Deputy Vice Chancellor Professor Tawana Cooper and other colleagues from academia and the research world. Captains of industry who are here, especially our various donors and SASOL, the sponsors tonight for tonight's event. I'd like to also recognize an elder statesman who happens to be with us today, and that's Uncle Kathy. Want to recognize Minister Hanekom, and I believe that there are several other ministers here whom I did not see earlier on. I think we do have a couple of ministers here. I'd like to recognize the senior managers of the public service, representatives of the media, the Mistra Council of Advisors, and the board members, and Mistra staff. Students, who are very important in our lives, as Dr. Ndlovu stated, we are here to make students to become better people and make significant contributions to this country. So I want to recognize the students who are here. And ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to the third Mistra annual lecture. Dr. Thandi Ndlovu, a member of the Mistra Board of Governors, is today the Master of Ceremonies. She made it clear that I must not say the Mistress of Ceremonies. She's clear that it's Masters of Ceremonies. She will introduce our distinguished speaker and the topic for the Mistra 2014 annual lecture. Tonight's lecture forms part of the Mistra's program of strategic reflections. We also pride ourselves of having a long-term view of the analysis we undertake. These two make us unique as a think tank of current times and the future. The recognition of Mistra as amongst the top 10 best new think tanks globally by the University of Pennsylvania 2013 Global Go-To Think Tank Report is an indication of the impact Mistra's research program and strategic reflections have been making over the past 4 years. Over the past 3 years, the Mistra annual lecture has become a feature of Gauteng, South Africa, and the global international landscape and discourse. It has represented nation formation, the search for usable knowledge, engaging in new knowledge generation, and the preparation of young leaders and thinkers for future responsibilities. The private and the public sectors and researchers have benefited tremendously from the work that Mistra has produced and continues to generate. Certainly, Mistra has distinguished itself as a knowledge reservoir, as was exemplified in the outstanding lecture that was presented by our Executive Director, Joel Nechitenzi, at Columbia University in New York on 29 October 2013, when the Pexley Ka Isaka Seme 107-year anniversary lecture was inaugurated. We actually saw professors taking notes when he gave that lecture at Columbia University. The title of his lecture was "The Vision of Seme 100 Years On. Is Civilization Still a Dream? And is regeneration of Africa possible?" Today's lecture is a continuation of the Mistra tradition of excellence in the logic of inquiry or inquiry. In the 2012 inaugural event, Mistra hosted Professor Thandeka Mkandawire of the London School of Economics and Political Science and the Institute for Future Studies from Stockholm, who delivered the lecture titled "Building the African State in the Age of Globalization." In 2013, the annual lecture was presented by Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, Director of the Makerere Institute of Social Research at Makerere University, Kampala, Uganda, and is also the Herbert Lehman Professor of Government at Columbia University, New York City. Professor Mamdani's topic was entitled "Beyond Nuremberg, the Historical Significance of the Post-Apartheid Transition in South Africa." He was comparing there the reconciliation approach taken by South Africa to what happened at the Nuremberg trials. I encourage you all to go through or Google that particular presentation. It was an excellent presentation. I have no doubt that tonight's lecture will also contribute to deeper insights into the issues our country and our continent is seized with. That it would also spark off debates and discussion in the media and other fora, as previous annual lectures have done. Please learn, think, and enjoy today's distinguished lecture. I kindly request the Master of Ceremonies to come and introduce our guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Mrs. Machel is a renowned international advocate for women and children's rights and has been a social and political activist over many decades. Mama Machel was the first Minister of Education and Culture of an independent Mozambique from 1975 to 1989. She led an inclusive movement to establish a national system of education which increased the primary school enrollment from 40% of children in 1975 to over 90% of the boys and 75% of the girls by 1989. She is one of the founders of the Forum of African Women Educationalists, an advocacy network which has been a reference point in the promotion of girls' education and empowerment on the African continent. In 1994, the Secretary General of the United Nations appointed her as an independent expert to carry out an assignment on the impact of armed conflict on children. Her groundbreaking report was presented in 1996 and established a comprehensive global agenda for the protection of children's rights in conflict situations. She was chair of Gavi Alliance for almost a decade. She served as an eminent person of the African Peer Review Mechanism of NEPAD. Mama Machel is a founder and president of the Foundation for Community Development in Mozambique. This is a grant-making organization, a builder of civil society, and a promoter of development based on communities. The organization advocates for a conducive environment for women's and children's development and protection. She was the chairperson of the National Organization of Children of Mozambique, the largest children's organization in the country, for 2 decades. Graça Machel was also the president of the National Commission of UNESCO in Mozambique for over 3 decades. Recently founded the Institute for Child Development to focus on early childhood development. She's a co-founder of the Mandela Institute for Development Studies. She's a founder of the Graça Machel Trust, an organization that promotes the rights of women and children on the continent, as well as good governance and democracy. She is co-convener of the high-level panel on education. This panel was initiated by the Global Campaign for Education to bring education to the fore of the global political agenda. The panel works together with GCE and a group of influential international figures to boost efforts to achieve education for all. Mama Machel serves in various capacities in several organizations: the Elders, the Africa Progress Panel, the High-Level Task Force on Innovative International Finance for Health Systems, the UN Millennium Development Goals Advocates, and the High-Level Panel of Eminent Persons on the post-2015 development agenda, amongst others. She is also an eminent person of the Gavi Alliance and the UN Foundation, chair of the Leadership Council for the Campaign to End Pediatric HIV/AIDS, chair of the board of the African Center for Constructive Resolution of Disputes, ACCORD, as it's known to most of us, chancellor of the University of Cape Town, and so the list goes. Mama Machel, I didn't conclude the list. It was difficult. Otherwise, you'd have been here the whole evening. Let me conclude by saying, over the years, Mrs. Machel has gained international recognition for her myriad of achievements. Her many awards include the Laureate of Africa Prize for Leadership for Sustainable End of Hunger. However, and this is off the script, in spite of these many achievements, I am now going to speak about a mother, a doting wife, a grandmother, to not only her own children, but to the children of the continent and the children of the globe. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, remember the lecture for tonight is, for Africa to live, the nation must die. The fluidity of the African identity in a changing environment. And who else to present it but Mama Gracia. Thank you very much.
It is a pleasure to join you this evening to explore a few new and not so new ideas. I thank Mistra for challenging me to reflect and to share my personal experiences and views. Let me begin by an anecdote of how I landed in a military training camp, Frelimo military training camp. I had just left university and I joined a group of young women coming from the 2 provinces up north of Mozambique. These 2 groups, none of the girls could speak Portuguese, sorry. They had been mobilized from the communities, the villages. They have never been at the capital of their province. The first time they came across with electricity, it was at the camp. They had no idea of what Mozambique as a country was all about. And I landed to be one of them for us for military training. They had been for 2 weeks. Then the leaders of the camp realized that they couldn't even grasp clearly the basic instructions of saying to the left or to the right. So my first shock is the first day of training when our instructor says, esquerda, which means left. Esquerda, iri. He had to turn to the left so that the girls would understand now they have to turn to the left. And then when he said, direita, iri, he would have to go to the right so that the girls could understand now it's to turn to the right. You can imagine, for someone who is coming from university, you have all these very fancy ideas of fighting for independence and who we are. And I say to myself, what? Who am I here? And who are my peers? The camp had developed an extraordinary program. All of us at the beginning, we would have to tell who we are and why we had decided to join Frelimo to fight for the liberation of our country. So one of the girls, each one of the girls, of course, had to tell the story. And that's where my education started. When they had to say what it meant oppression for them, what colonialism was, and then what Mozambique was, and how they had decided to join the movement. I'm not going to go into detail, but it was the first shock for me to understand that what I always thought as Mozambique, it was much more diverse, much more complex than I thought. And there were people in my own country whose understanding of what the country was, it was just the small village where they have been. They had no idea of what the sea is, yet we have 3,000 kilometers of coast in Mozambique. They had no idea what is a building of 3-4 stores. And it meant that the understanding of nation and country and the diversity of Mozambique certainly was completely different from mine. So we started the journey together. We'd have to train and live together, many times communicating with signs. Why I'm bringing this example? In this continent of ours, there are still millions and millions of Africans who are born, grow, and die in this very limited space of their village and their community. Without having an opportunity of understanding or coming across with the magnitude of what a nation is. And remember, many African countries are not like South Africa. These people, many times they can't read and write. They have no television. The only thing they can listen to is radio, many times in their local language. So I'm bringing this as a first reflection of what is identity of a citizen who belongs to a certain country. I think that our initial relationships, family and others, our positions in our family, our community, our society, our relationship with authority, with our elders, with our peers, these are the first fundamentals which mold us as social beings. But the lecture tonight was suggested from a quote which Samora Machel said in the camp, that for the nation to live, the tribe must die. He was very good in using metaphors. So tonight we are going to discuss, does the tribe need to die so that the nation can live? In other words, does the nation have to die for Pan-African Africa to strive? All of us are molded by a specific socio-cultural context in which we are born into. Common history, common language, experiences, social institutions. These are key components of elements of what we can call our cultural identity. These become the reference that build our social being, the human being that we initially are. This builds our initial value system. So generally speaking, this social-cultural context, these relationships can be seen as the seeds of our identity, of our social beings. They can and will expand, be built upon, change shape, but they are still the seeds of our future selves. We can look at the context within which these seeds are planted in a range of ways: the socio-cultural, economic, socio-economic, etc. And many of those contexts overlap. In considering the socio-cultural context, ethnicity is a core framework, and it is in this way that the tribe helps form the seeds of our identities. It is clear that the many overlapping contexts of our early years means that sometimes our tribes develop in different ways. The ethnic provides one set of lenses. Economic wealth or financial poverty might provide another. Age and gender, etc., provide yet another lenses. Yet I would argue that some of those lenses are subsumed within the wider sociocultural lens of tribe. If tribal norms then seed our identities, it is argumented that for a national identity to thrive, the tribal identity must die, or that further, for Pan-Africanism to thrive, national identities must die. I would argue that this is not the case. Let's look at the analogy of a seed. When a seed is planted, it doesn't die. With the right conditions, including soil, water, sun, etc., the seed does not die. It is transformed into another living entity. The seed transforms, at one point spreading its roots and then growing out of the earth and forming a stem, eventually a trunk, branches, and leaves. It all depends on what type of seed. Indeed, what is in the seed is what dictates the nature of transformation that emerges from its sowing. The very being of the seed maintains its identity in the transformation process. There is an Akan saying which says, I quote, "A crab does not give birth to a cow," unquote. Thus, the seed from an orange will produce an orange. The seed from an avocado will produce an avocado. The innate influences the transformation, yet does not kill in the transformation. And as human beings, we are able to influence the transformation, to use old seeds to breed stronger hybrids, and to develop new strains and new strengths. How to make a tribe transition and support nationhood. Tribal values feed into the national identity, and the nation feeds into the tribal identity. There has to be a value proposition for the tribe to feel embraced by and integrated into the nation. But at the same time, the nation has to be able to embrace and integrate the tribe. By extension, actually, I'm talking of ethnic diversity, racial diversity, and class diversity. In our continent, I think we are still struggling with the question of nation building. I can mention maybe one country where history and language have played a role in such a way you can say that Tanzania is close to be a nation with some sort of a cohesion. And if you want to go out of our continent, and I know this is controversial, the United States of America, despite its huge diversity, people of all origins, you name it, but there's one thing they have in common. They feel American. They are Americans. And we have to question, what is it which make people of Japanese origin, of Irish origin, Latin America, Africans, all the kind of diversity you can think of, even the huge diversity of class. But at the moment of the truth, they are all Americans. What is it? What are the elements of that national identity which builds what you can call the pride of belonging to a nation? These are complex dimensions of which African nations are struggling to comprehend, to manage in the process of forging a nation. I dare to say that, with the exception of Tanzania I mentioned, none of our African nations have resolved the question of nation building. And even worse, I don't think we have clarity on how to build on that diversity and to forge a cohesive nation. I'm looking at the tribe, and more widely at the nation, as at the heart of the identity we form through our ethnic, socio-cultural context, as the seed that is within us all. That seed of our identities is transformed as we grow, as we extend our relationships, our physical, emotional, intellectual context. Yet our identities remain rooted in the original influences and norms within which our social being developed. So the seed does not die. It is rooted, but it is transformed. So our original identities do not die. We are rooted, but as additional influences and contexts are added to our lives, so we transform our own identities, and our identities are expanded and they are transformed. So, no, I do not believe that the tribe must die for the nation to live. I believe that ethnic diversity, racial diversity, and class diversity must be offered a clear value proposition that makes them feel that they benefit from being part of a nation state. We have this space we call our homeland. In Portuguese, I would say pátria. The space where we all feel we belong. Yet it's not very clearly defined. I would submit for us to think tonight, what does each one of you mean to be a South African? Why do you feel and you believe that you are a South African? In a nation where today we still say, I'm African, and this one is Indian, and that one is white, and that one is colored. The racial divide in South Africa is still very clear and deep. Yet I will ask, there is elements of cement which bound all of us. What are they? How do we cultivate them so that we grow from that kind of diversity of ethnicity, and I'm including race and class, but to grow and feel all of us, we are South African. I believe that we must provide the right conditions for the tribe to root a national identity and a continental identity, to move beyond its initial nonsense and enable a stronger, equally vibrant, but possibly further seeing and more connected being to emerge, whether in our individual identities or our national and continental identities. Let me again use the example of a tree. With a tree, the stronger the roots are, the better able the tree is to resist winds and external shocks, because it is deeply rooted, but also because the transformation has allowed it to protect itself through its branches, its leaves, its fruits and flowers, and through its connectedness with other products of the earth. Then the tree is strong. There is an intrinsic relationship with the initial seed, but the final product is more intricate, it's bigger, it's stronger, and more connected to the external world. As social beings, as we grow and absorb the influences of a wider society, so we transform ourselves and gain a broader sense of belonging beyond the family, beyond the tribe and race, beyond the nation. In a world where modern transportation means that we can travel hundreds of thousands of miles in less than a day, our ability to move within other geographies, other cultures, is multiplied. So the influences that mold our identities are multiplied and extensive. When that works well, we can gain a broader sense of belonging in a continental and international context. Yet we are grounded. That broader sense of belonging still recognizes and salutes the initial relationship and the intellectual and emotional linkages that root our belonging. For this transformation to take place in positive context, building on the strengths of our sociocultural roots rather than being strangled by them, we need the appropriate influences to surround our sense of being. We need the right context, motivations, and visions to move beyond the tribe, beyond the nation, into a vibrant sense of Pan-Africanism. Let me recall our recent history. When Nkrumah, being the first sub-Saharan country to become independent, he opened his country and his borders to welcome all the liberation movements to have a home in Ghana. Joined then by the like of Haile Selassie, Modibo Keita, Ben Bella, Nyerere, and others. They formed the huge movement of Pan-Africanism, together with others from the diaspora, like the Dubois, to say, freedom for all of us. The roots of Pan-Africanism came from that understanding that from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, from the Cape to Cairo, as we say, from all corners of the continent, we had experienced the same slavery. We were experiencing colonialism and oppression, and we had a common destiny. So Pan-Africanism was born out of the necessity of freedom and independence for all of us in this continent. And in every village you would go those days, even those most remote I'm talking about, they would know there is a liberation movement. There is a movement which bound all of us to be free from colonialism. And you'll say, well, it was easy because it was external forces. Then we had a second generation of Pan-Africanists. At the moment the continent was politically free, we had also visionaries like the ones like Thabo Mbeki, Obasanjo, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, Shisano, and others who established for us NEPAD, and they established even the African peer review mechanism. To say, in days of today, we still have another kind of oppression to all of us. We need to free ourselves from poverty, and the only way is to establish the mechanism through which we can build prosperity for all Africans. And just remember, it was up north, Algeria. It was at the west, Obasanjo, as examples. In the south, Thabo Mbeki and Shisano. Even Egypt, those days, he was very strong. It's strange enough, it was a time of Mubarak, but it was a very strong supporter of NEPAD. Again, leadership which understands that there's no nation of ours which can survive alone. We have to fight together. So Pan-Africanism is possible, but it has to be around a very clear set of principles and values and goals and targets we are struggling, we are fighting for together. Look, for instance, we have to feel that there's value and benefits of belonging to a broad African entity. It can't be simply because you were born here on this continent. Let's use the example of the European Union. You see, many countries are queuing to join the European Union because there's something very concrete which helps them to be better, which is going to uplift their nations if they join the European Union. We must question then ourselves, what is it our African Union is offering to our nations? Why do we join? Why do we need to be part of this organization? It's not only because of intent and political statements, but the question I leave is, do we have clarity as in the past when the founders of Pan-Africanism, they clearly set the message to every African. It was freedom and independence. Today, do we have a very clear message, a very clear goal when we join and we say we are Africans? I would like to suggest that Pan-Africanism has to strive on the basis of claiming our own identity in the past. It was mentioned that I am a co-founder of the Mandela Institute for Development Studies. And one of the programs we are undertaking is what we call African Heritage Research Program. And we are questioning, who are we as Africans? Because from the Berlin conference, as you can see, we are all these small parts in this our continent, which we are told we are 54 states. But what was it before Berlin? Who were we before Berlin? We existed, we had history, we had culture, we had a way of being. So the first study which we came across is to define languages. And if you can see in this map, the blue up there is what you can call the Afro-Asiatic. And mostly, they use the Arabic language. The yellow is what you can call Nilo-Saharan. And it goes through more or less the Nile. The red is what we can call Niger-Congo. The orange is Niger-Congo Bantu. And I want to insist on this one. You can see that from that corner where you have the Ghana and others, then migration came down to the Central Africa until we come to Southern Africa. These people, they have very much in common in terms of language, in terms of social institutions, in terms of practices, traditions, you name it. So, we do have much more to do as South Africans with Ghana, with Nigeria, than we may think. If we go down, we start the language, and that's the space in which we are now, just to identify certain words which are exactly the same thing. They can be pronounced a little bit different, but they mean the same thing. We are in the process of learning what are the practices, the traditions, the institutions which are in common. Of course, there are also differences, but there's much more commonalities. To say to ourselves, we are much more than English-speaking countries. We are much more than French-speaking countries. We are much more than Portuguese-speaking countries. In fact, we have our own languages. And why this is important is Pan-Africanism has to have that emotional element into it. As I was mentioning at the beginning, in the village where you are born, in the family, the value system which molds you define your identity. And in a Pan-Africanist identity, these are the fundamentals of have to take us back to say who we are. And not fight at the African Union whenever we have to elect somebody. Instead of choosing the best among ourselves, we say whether he speaks French or he speaks English or Portuguese. Even here, I mean, not here with us, not much like that. But in West Africa, although it's a regional economic community, when it's the turn of West Africa to take a position, the first thing they discuss is he French speaking? Is he English speaking? To establish the difference between someone from Côte d'Ivoire and someone from Ghana, independently of the qualifications and the ability to deliver in that position. So I'm proposing that in our journey to define the roots and the values of Pan-Africanism, we have to claim this map. Which means without changing the borders which were imposed on us by Berlin, but we have to expand our sense of identity to the roots of who we were and who we want to be, so that my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they will be proud of being this and not to be speaking Portuguese or speaking English. These were, I think we can switch it off now. The Nkrumahs and the Nyereres and others, they looked beyond the Berlin boundaries to an Africa where we could build on our own commonalities and our similarities to form a cohesive and collaborative African institutions, African cultures, African economic systems, African ways of thinking and being that would help our continent to thrive and protect our peoples from further generations of colonialism and imperialism. They highlighted our shared experiences of slavery, of colonialism, but also our shared cultural heritages that had protected our communities through the ravages of imperialism and other oppressions. They emphasized the importance not only of nation state. After all, there were people who led, the fight against colonialism in the various countries, but also how those nations would work together to protect our continent from further manifestations of imperialism. That was why solidarity with the national liberation movement was crucial to their beliefs and actions. They saw an African with strong political and economic nations. Yes, but they saw an Africa where those nations worked together to give us a continent advantage through various types of economic, social, and political integrations. Those Pan-African activists, I would call them, provided the conditions, the thinking, and the context that have helped our seed of nations to begin to transform into a stronger entity that is Pan-African. I fear, however, that we might allow that transformation to wither under the lack of rain, the lack of new and collective thinking integrated institutions, the lack of the poor soil, which we feel with the rarity of future planning together, not separately, and for decades, not months or years. We feel a proliferation of weeds, which are unhelpful, nationalistic competition, short-sighted conflicts of all types, narrow-mindedness, and social injustice and oppression. You would question today, what is it which is dividing people in South Sudan? What is it which is dividing people in the Congo, the DRC? What is it which is dividing Africans when they engage in wars against brothers and sisters within the same boundaries, actually, having fought together? What is it? To provide good conditions for the transformation to a vibrant, healthy Africa that revives our fading traditions of challenging the world, bringing new thoughts, new arts, new economics, new science, and new cultures to our global context. We need the rain of a clear and positive vision of our Africa. We need the fertilizer of new generations of thoughts and youthful energy that looks beyond narrow interests and shallow, dying ideas. We need the soil that pulls through our positive traditions and links them with new ways of being, new ways of interacting with our peers, with our comrades across the continent, and with the new trends across the globe. Yes, African identities are fluid, but so many of our continental proverbs point to the strength of fluidity, where there is a core holding that fluidity true. I stand here before you with many identities. I'm a woman, I'm a Mozambican, an African, and many more. Our children and grandchildren, for some of you like me, their identity as Africans, it is not based anymore in the tribe. Sometimes they don't even speak the language of the language of their parents, what you call mother tongue. But they are Africans. And you see even those who are coming back from the diaspora, who they grew there, when they come back, they choose to come to the continent, not necessarily to the countries of their parents as origin. They can come to Ghana, to Ethiopia, to Rwanda, wherever they go, they are coming home. They are coming to Africa, back. So we do have a new identity of African emerging. So what we need is the rain. And I think today what we miss is that strong, clear message which is telling us where we come from, who we are today, where we have to go together, building in that sense of solidarity. In other terms, I'm saying what we miss today is clear leadership. Being African is not something being African is not something which just happens simply because we were born here and because of the air we breathe. So I'm asking tonight, our discussion will be, what is it means to be African to you? As I have asked, what does it mean to be South African? What does it mean for you to be African? I don't have answers. And I don't think anyone can really have complete answers. But I think what this institute, Makumbuga Institute, is challenging us is to think through. It's really to question ourselves in terms of our identity, our identities, many identities, and how the overlapping of those identities make us strong, not weaker, as many times we believe. How do we go beyond your small community to embrace the nation, and how do you embrace, as a nation, you embrace the rest of the continent? These are the thoughts which I was trying in a very, in my way, as activist. I should have said this at the beginning. You are used to have intellectuals who come and give lectures here. And Joe, you made tonight the mistake of calling an activist. So this is my own experience. And I think the challenge of us in different positions, different ages, men and women, young and old, our major challenge is to claim those identities and make them a strength and not make of the different identities we have or we are elements of division which make us weaker. I wanted to close by saying something personal, if you allow me. For many of you, it's the first time I see you after Madiba's passing. And I wanted to say to each one of you and all of you, thank you. In many ways, Madiba went through 2013 because there was such a positive energy being sent to him to keep him alive. South Africans kept him alive. And he felt that. And that's why even at a critical moment, Madiba would bounce back. So I want to say thank you for the love and support. Many of you prayed, I don't know how many times, for him. I just want to say thank you. We don't take it for granted. I don't take it for granted. I want also to thank you, because when the moment came and we had to accept that he had to go, there was a moment of unity, of total unity in this country, which maybe it's unique. And I am of the belief that his last gift to South Africa, it was precisely the opportunity of all South Africans, regardless of the diversities of identities I talked about. All South Africans, they were united in the love and best wishes for him. So in essence, the last message of Madiba to South Africa is, you are not Indian South Africa. You are not white South Africa. You are not Xhosa South Africa or Zulu South African. You are South Africans. And this is what he wanted you, through those moments of uncertainty, he wanted you to experience one single thing which could unite all of you in love. And it was around him. So, thank you. Thank you so much. But more importantly, I would urge that with reflections of this nature, soon than later, we will identify ourselves as belonging to this nation, this great nation of us, and not to the small, restricted identities which are still defining us. And I thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Mama. I'll leave it to Joel at the appropriate time to thank you, but I'm sure every member of this audience is appreciative of the words of wisdom that you shared with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 15 minutes for a question and answer session, and at exactly 9:22, I will stop the question and answer session and call Joel to close for us. a request is that you please restrict your questions to the subject at hand, the theme of the evening. We know we all have these other burning questions to pose to Mama at the appropriate time and through other forums. I'm sure she will like to share some insights into the questions that you have. I'm going to allow 2 questions per block, and then we get Mama to answer your questions. I know as well there might be people who just want to comment. You are free to comment, but please, ladies and gentlemen, let's not write theses. I know this is an academic institution and we may be tempted to write theses. To the young people in the audience, please don't feel intimidated. You've got the professors and the doctors and everybody else and the judges. But this is your South Africa that we're talking about. It is your future, and I always encourage young people to be the ones to ask the questions and to pose the challenges, because some of us are in the afternoon of our lives. And we might not be building a future that is going to be conducive for your sustenance going forward. We have roving mics. I will ask to my left if there's anybody, 2 people with questions or comments. There's a hand at the back, the gentleman in the orange shirt, and there's a young man in front here. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much for a very inspiring speech. The one question I do have is relating to what seems to be 2 different strands. I look at the Mapungubwe sign which says, "Why do nations succeed?" And so I'm wondering if there's any element of healthy competition between nations that could actually, seems that it's against sort of a Pan-Africanism, but would actually then drive us forward. For example, I'm from Malawi, and I've always felt that if our president said, in 10 years' time we want to have a bigger GDP than Zambia, that would get us, in a healthy way, to compete towards development, or to say, we want our maternal mortality rate to be better than Zambia's, in the same way that the French and the British compete. So yes, they go to the EU, but that in a sense is against, as I say, a nice sort of collective African sense, and yet it's a healthy competition. So I wondered if you could address that issue, that tension.
Name,
Hello?
please.
My name is Samir Andera Rees, born and bred in Johannesburg. Thank you, Mama Machel, for your words. I just wanted to talk to you about your idea of overarching principles that guide Pan-Africanism. And you, as a leader in Africa, you are obviously someone that has an influence on those principles. Now, you're also an activist, and I'm sure you've come across certain principles in African culture that go against your own beliefs, things like ingrained sexism or perhaps homophobia. How, when you are trying to guide those principles, do you deal with issues like that which perhaps are not commonly accepted or not kind of the norm as far as culture is concerned?
Good evening. My name is Jamila Douache. I'm coming from Algeria, and I'm just passing through here. My question is, my country is the biggest country in Africa, but if I ask every gentleman and lady here, they would consider Algeria more like an Arab country than an African country. How can I change their mind and prove them that Algeria is also an African country and we are African as well?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andy Lekotashe, former Talk 702 Midnight Slot, a host. You know, there is a tendency on the part of Africa to rally behind a common cause, whilst they are waging the struggle for emancipation and democracy. However, I cannot help but notice this sharp disjuncture that arises post-colonial era, where you have certain countries evolving into a monolith. Sometimes that results into an annihilation of certain nations, or a subjugation of smaller or minority tribes. And this is is threatening to rear its ugly head here in South Africa. I mean, you have constructs like Cosa Nostra, for example, and of late you have constructs like the Zulufication of the ANC. How do we arrest that problem? Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Precious Banda, the Treasurer General of the South African Student Congress, SASCO.
Secretary General of?
South African Student Congress, SASCO. Now, when Ma'am went on to give the lecture, and then spoke about a tree and how she argued that a nation can still live, for Africa to live. And I go on to give an example of a child like myself with two parents of two different countries. Zambia, South Africa. Socialization, having experience of both countries. Shouldn't the nation die for a young African like myself to live? Shouldn't a nation die for me to have a definition or to define myself differently as an African? Speaking also of the liberation movement and how our parents have to go to different countries and a mixture of our people. I want to argue differently, hence I give that question. And the second one is, in a changing continent and trying to establish a new identity as Africans, what is the role of women in this? Looking at the oppressive culture of Africa on women, where do we place our women in all these things?
Thank you very much. My name is Mwagwa Salamalala, a social activist. That's the totality of my title. Now, I want to include perhaps in the discussion the question of the socio-economic life of what do we call countries now, and how they relate, and what exactly that relate to the divisions of these nations and tribes. You will agree with me, I suppose, that Berlin actually was about dividing Africa, but also making production points in the continent. We are sitting in Johannesburg, and we know that Johannesburg was not only built by people of South African citizenry. It was built by people across the SADC region, or what we'll call the SADC region. But the issue is, what then becomes the opportunities, and whether do you want to keep these opportunities to yourself because you are a South African, and exclude others? That become a serious question. And what value do you add as a developed economy of Johannesburg, for instance, or Lagos, to other struggling economies? What is the essence of a shared economy, socio-economic life that include the exchange in culture and knowledge between countries?
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I think we got the gist of your question.
Healthy competition. Unfortunately, I don't think I can give very good examples of healthy competition among nations. Let me try to use the example of SADC. We are expected to forge a new sense of citizenship, which is SADC citizenship. We are supposed to more and more get our nations and our economies much more integrated. But if you look deeply, the reasons why regional integration is moving so slow it's precisely because we fail to use the different resources which are available in each one of our countries to engage in that healthy competition. On the contrary, we compete against each other. So I'm not so sure whether really I can give you a good example of that. I think the sense of being nationalistic and the narrow sense of sovereignty is overriding the need for us to work together to take pride on success of others and then to move our regions together. I'm talking of sub-regions, but it could be any of the other sub-regions. The feeling of having another African country succeeding not always is taken as pride for some of us. On the contrary, we have still lots of jealousies. But for me, I think, again, it's because our leaders together, they fail to constantly and regularly educate us, and we are not also able to challenge sufficiently our leaders to play their role. So I want to put it in the two directions. There is responsibility of leaders, but there's also responsibility of citizens. Someone has asked about overarching principles of Pan-Africanism. Well, something which came to in my work is Africans in our very good sense of traditions. We respect life. Respect for life. It is generally protected by Africans, that sense of protection for life. That's why we are really horrified when atrocities take place, which means we feel that sense of convulsion. You say convulsion? Yeah. When we see human suffering. In any community on this continent, that sense of protection for life, protecting the other, it is an overarching principle of solidarity for Africans. That's what I believe. It's one of the examples I can give. But I'm not ignoring that there are many destructive forces. And in our society, in this country, we know very well. But I wouldn't like to get into that debate. Joel, I think we can have another conversation led by somebody else. Led by somebody else. My suggestion is really for us to consider a discussion and asking the question, why there is so much violence inflicted by some of us against others in the scale, in the sophistication which we witness in this country. I want to submit my view is that we have not taken the time to deal with the psychological damage which apartheid did to us. We seem to think that with our constitution, wonderful principles which are in our constitution, somehow with the attempt of readdressing the economic inequalities, it's not working, but at least we are trying. We have something in place. But I don't think we have been asking what has been done to us for us to see some of us inflicting so much pain in children, in women, and elderly. That is against what I was saying, respect for life. But it is happening, which I understand. It's a deviation of what as Africans we would be. So I want to submit another discussion about this, because I think it has to do with the process of healing which we need to embark on. We need to heal our wounds, which are in our spirit, our emotions, in our psyche. We need to embark on a healing process. Anyway, the other question, it was not a question about Algeria. I think there's a lot of ignorance about the role of Algeria on this continent, really, starting from the liberation struggle. You know, Algeria was one of the first countries to receive freedom fighters, to be trained, and even to provide them with arms to liberate our continent. The example of this country, Madiba was trained in Algiers. When he left in 1963, he went to Ethiopia and he went to Algiers, and there are photos which show him in a training camp in Algiers. Many young people are not informed about this. Ben Bella was one of the first, founders of the African Union. As I mentioned, in the second generation of Pan-Africanism, Algeria, Abdelaziz is one of the pillars of what NEPAD is all about, of what the African Peer Review is all about. Until today, one of the biggest contributors to the African Union is Algiers. So Algiers is a very, very much African, except that there is no much knowledge among us about this. So your question is, what do I do? You do, I do, many of us, those who know, we should get this message across. That, you know, Algeria has much more to do with us in Southern Africa, maybe, than some of our own neighbors. So, I don't think I want to get engaged with Xhosa Nostra and Zulu Nostra. I don't think I want to engage with this. But again, this is precisely, the raison d'être of the discussion tonight is how do you move from your feeling as belonging to an ethnic group, but you grow to become national. And you really, really, you embrace the nation. That's why I'm saying we need to discuss much more openly, what does it mean to be South African? And we are talking, actually, when you say this, you are talking about the biggest, political organization in this country. The organization which has been leading South Africa since the time of independence in terms of government. Okay? Because I think this is what I understand, what you're talking about. So, what is happening? Why are we losing the glue? The glue which has united millions of South Africans to fight against apartheid, and all of us, we were there. Some of us, some of our colleagues, they died precisely to liberate our country together. And at that moment, there was no Zulu, Xhosa, or Venda, or whoever. They were simply South Africans. What is happening when, years later, we see some sort of emergence of the kind of issues you are talking about? I have no answer. I leave it to Makumbube to organize another debate. The question which was asked there, it's about, what about a child who is born from parents who, it was like Zambian, and that's, a South African, for example. That's the best of examples of the new breeds, or the Africans, where then, as you are saying, when I say the tribe should not die, I'm saying the elements which give you the root of your identity, those should not die. I'm not talking about because there are many other elements of a tribe which have to die. I can give you an example, and which comes to the next question, is the place and the role of women in traditional societies. That has to die. That has to die. But I'm saying that my relationship, I could ask you, when you are in danger, there's something which challenges you, your first expression, you're not going to express yourself in English. You'll express yourself in your mother tongue, isn't it? That's what I mean. That's what I mean, that doesn't die. And it shouldn't die because it gives you that deep sense of being rooted in certain values, which are simply a value system, in which I could try again to repeat. It helps you. How do you relate to members of your family? How do you relate to members of the community? How do you relate to elderly? How do you relate to nature, by the way? All those things we learn those very early ages of our lives. Those things, they keep us rooted. And when you are an African, in Pan-African terms, you go back to the early years of your age to know how you were molded, how your social being was molded. That's what I mean. But there are definitely elements of what you were saying about the role of women. I wouldn't talk about this as the role. I have heard a lot of roles of women. I would speak much more of the position, the place of women in our families, in our communities, and then the rights of women, because it's a completely different story. When you say women play a role, you are implying that there's somebody who is leading what has to be done, and then a woman plays a role on that. And I'm saying it's the place women are, and they are actually. They are taking a center stage. They're taking the place where exactly they should be. Within the family, within the workplace, within the universities. Well, it is happening. But we are dealing with hundreds and thousands of years of tradition. Don't forget, we have only 50 years of freedom. And 50 years in history of nations, it's a very short time. 50 years. For us, it is long enough because we achieved freedom, but for that kind of cultural transformation which needs to say who is who in relation to gender, we just started. And I have to say, this country, because of certain policies which have been adopted, actually, despite all the difficulties, actually, South Africa is doing well. I have to say that. And South Africa has to take pride on that. South Africa is the youngest of nations to be free. You only are, I am South African as well, but you, you only are 20 years old. We are not like Ghana, who is 50-something years old. But when it comes to the place of women and how the women are taking the center stage, you are far ahead of Ghana. You are far ahead of many other countries. So I think we need to accept that cultural transformation takes a long time. That's why, again, I'll go back to the issue of the rain. The rain has to be always there to nurture the principles and the values which have to emerge to build a new national identity. And that is not always, it's not always done. I would even allow myself to criticize. When you have the Women's League, the ANC Women's League, saying that, oh, the country, I don't know why they say the country or said the ANC is not ready for a woman to be president. I felt I was going to hang myself. Yes. Because frankly speaking, what are we saying about that with the life of Lillian Ngoyi, of Ruth First, Albertina Sisulu? What do you mean? So, I'm saying we do have very positive steps taking place. But we have among women still very, very retrograde. I don't know how to say this in English. I think in Portuguese. But you know what I mean? Yes. But I have to say this. I really believe that a very deep transformation of relations and relationships between men and women, particularly in our families, will happen the moment all women, will have the strength and the courage to say no. Just to say no. This is one. It will happen when women of my age will stop forcing their little girls, their little babies, of 8, 9, 10, to force them for genital mutilation. It's women who do it. It will stop when women of my age will consent to have a child of 8, 9, 10, to be given away to be married to a man of 50, 60. These are the issues which we women have to deal with. As grandmothers, as mothers-in-laws, and whatever, in which capacity, the major change in terms of believing in ourselves that we have the same value as anyone else, it has to happen in us. Other people will say, yeah, it has to happen with men. Absolutely. I also agree. Men have to join. But it's not men who are going to liberate us. We have to liberate ourselves. So, we have a challenge here. We really have to accept that we have a challenge. And it will change. I didn't say this. It will change the moment where I, as a mother, I educate my son and my daughter equally, because we don't in many cases. It will change at that moment in our families. So, men, yes, you have to change, and change quickly. But we women also, we have to take responsibility. Just to take the responsibility of the value we carry.
Program Director, distinguished guests, colleagues, I think I should start off by thanking the Program Director for your splendid management of this annual lecture. Those who have partnered us for a long time would know that this year's lecture came later than normal, which is around March. In part, this helped us to avoid being drowned out by the so-called silliness of the electoral season. But further, the domino effect of the tragedy last December meant that Ms. Machel would only be available after June. And the happy coincidence out of all this is that we could have the 2014 Mapungubwe lecture during what I would refer to as Mandela Month. And so our gratitude multiplies manifold in that Ms. Machel prioritized Mistra for one of her very first public engagements after the period of mourning. There's no doubt that it was most appropriate that we should select an eminent daughter of Africa, a real and symbolic national of many countries, an Afropolitan par excellence, to give her testimony about what it means to be African and to help answer those difficult questions. Is there an African identity? If not, is there an overarching identity? And if so, if you don't have one African identity, what must die for the African meta identity to live? And out of the discussion, I think all of us have come to appreciate that this cannot be divorced from the gender question. Indeed, the vision of African economic integration, the development indicators, and the measures of good political and economic governance must in time include not only the free and multi-directional movement of goods, but also of people. African people proudly bearing the words, "I am an African." And so we thank you, Ms. Machel, for your words of wisdom, for who you are as a force of example in South Africa, in Mozambique, and further afield. We also wish to thank you, the audience, for showing that combination of necessary reverence as well as critical engagement. An audience that can watch football beyond midnight and remain alert the following evening. An audience that can withstand the biting cold of wintry weather and lend warmth to a discussion that should continue. Continue because, as Ms. Machel has said, the national question, the identity question, is never really resolved. To Wits University, we have partnered us in hosting this event, and in particular the Chancellor. To Olive and Plates caterers, who understand that you cannot live on words alone. To Yellow Woods, who sponsored the cold drinks that are meant to keep us warm. To Sasol, who have contributed the resources to make this event possible. And to Masake Events Company, to all these, our eternal gratitude. I also wish to thank SAFM for broadcasting this event live, and also thank your colleagues who belong to other media houses. And I'm quite certain that all of you as journalists brought your licenses along. And so, as we rise to continue the discussion in other fora, as Mistra would want to say, arising out of the lecture and out of the work that we do, for genuine transformation to live and to thrive, intellectual indolence must die. Thank you, everyone.